Hi, everybody, and welcome to my webinar, Shamanism 101. I just want to see who is here and if you can hear me, and just to let me know by putting your messages on the chat, just to let me know if you can hear me and everything's working okay. Okay, great. So, I decided to run this webinar because I've been on the shamanic path since returning from the Peruvian Amazon in 1998. And I trained out there with a traditional plant medicine shaman. I didn't go looking for this journey. It kind of found me in a moment of deep depression where I kind of gave up my will to live on the planet, not understanding how everything was happening, why things were happening like they were, the environmental destruction that I was seeing around me, and just the utter hopelessness of the existence, and why I was here. And my teacher came to me in a vision and told me he was waiting for me and that he had the medicine for me. And I really believed in that medicine. I really believed in that vision. It was more than a vision. It was a very powerful connection that I felt on a very deep heart level. And how he came to me was that I ended up falling down a mountain. And by falling down the mountain, I I got saved by a tree. And I believe that while I was falling down the mountain, I was preparing for death. So my body was releasing a lot of chemicals and hormones and adrenaline. And when a tree saved me at the base of the mountain after having fallen down, I released a lot of bliss molecules, and basically I feel that I was a walking chemical cocktail. And I went out into the mountains that evening with my brain basically blown open, my heart blown open, my whole body almost blown open, and called out to the mountains, why am I here? And like, who am I? And that's when I saw the shaman. And my belief is that he was taking ayahuasca in the Amazon. And in that fifth dimensional space, I met him. And he told me at this point that I was ready to meet him and to find him. So I flew to the Amazon in a complete belief that I would meet my teacher. And I did meet him 14 hours away from Iquitos, in a local community, serving local people, uh, plant medicines to help them. Now, in these local communities, there were no pharmaceuticals. The pharmaceuticals that were there were very few. Most people couldn't afford. So they were relying on the shaman or the curandero to heal them using the plant medicines of the Amazon. And ayahuasca was obviously the most used of the plant medicines. People would come in ceremony and sit with the shaman and take ayahuasca. And ayahuasca was like the diagnostic tool for the shaman. And the ayahuasca would then tell the shaman what plants were needed in order to help heal the person who was sick. It also acted as a purgative. So in the ceremony, the ill people would be purging or pooing their illness out. So it also worked as quite a strong purgative. Most people, I would say, all people really in the Amazon went for physical ailment. They did not go for a psychological ailment. They did not go for psychological problems. They went for physical problems and physical illnesses. However, there were a few people that would come to clean out the alcohol from their system and have a good clean out of any alcohol or and other intoxicants, like chicha and stuff like that. So people would also come to clear out their bodies, but no one would come to the Amazon for psychological problems. In fact, psychological problems were not really a thing to be cured in the Amazon. It was purely physical ailments. And while I was The sign of a powerful shaman is that no one dies in the house of the shaman. So a shaman is as good as the people that he keeps alive. And I was very blessed because no one had actually died in the house of my shaman. So he had a wonderful reputation, and people from all over the area that we were at on the Tawayu River would come and train with him and drink with him and work with him. And he called me, and I ended up training with him. I can't say that I trained in anything specific. I took a lot of plant medicines, not just ayahuasca. I took chichiwasha and various other plants and barks and mixtures that he would give me on a regular basis, alongside the ayahuasca ceremonies that we would have about 3 times a week, depending on how our week was in the jungle. When we were cultivating, we wouldn't drink as much. When we had lots of sick people, we would drink a lot more. So it balanced it out. But the shaman was really the doctor of the area, and that's what he was known for, as a curandero, not as a spiritual leader or as a spiritual guru or as a spiritual person, but very much as a person that helped cure and helped heal you. So while I was training with him, I learned how to make the medicine and to communicate with nature and communicate and work with the plants. And after 3.5 months, he sent me back to the West, telling me that my destiny was back here in the West. I didn't want to go back at all. I wanted to stay with him. I didn't want to go back to the urban jungle. I really loved the Amazon, and I felt very at peace and at home there. And my dream was to have married a indigenous person, from the community, had a load of kids, and set up my own plant medicine retreat, and learned much more and gone much deeper with the plant medicines. That was what my ego really wanted, and that was my desire. And had we not have had the argument at the end of my time there, I wonder whether that would have happened, because I think that I would have almost have returned much earlier on in my journey to have completed that dream, because that dream was very strong for me. I really felt my place was in the Amazon, my place was with the plant medicines. And so coming back and living out there was something that and also to escape from the urban jungle, because I really hated it here, and I hated the lifestyle and the pollution and the waste and the way that the illusion is so firmly entrenched in our psyches of what we think makes us happy. And being around plant medicines in the jungle and being in tune with nature and Mother Earth resonated much more with my own heart. So going back to the West and not having an opportunity to return back to the Amazon was incredibly painful for me, and a very difficult pill to swallow for quite a few years into my journey. It also left me at quite a lost point as to how do I bring the messages of what I'd learned in the Amazon to the urban jungle. And this is where I think it becomes really important, because even though it was a massive burden not to go back to the Amazon and marry an indigenous person and live out there, I feel that my destiny, having been in the West, is as important or more important even than that journey, that destiny of having lived in the Amazon with a family and stayed there. And that is because here in the West, and certainly in Europe, and I'm going to be very Europe specific here, because we don't have any indigenous people living in England. And what I mean by indigenous, but native groups that have been living here for thousands of years. In Europe, we wiped out our indigenous populations hundreds and if not thousands of years ago. The herbalists and healers that were here have been decimated in numbers through the witch pogroms. And so here in Europe, we don't have an indigenous culture in inverted commas. And why I put it in inverted commas when I say indigenous is because for me, what the plant medicines have told me is that we are all indigenous to Mother Earth. And one of the big problems that we have on the planet is this idea of separation. And this idea that if you live in a certain place or you do something in a certain way, then that's you're separated to everybody else. And this thinking is what's creating a lot of the problems on the planet at the moment. And if we all came to the understanding that we are all indigenous to Mother Earth, wherever we live and however we are and wherever we are on the planet, then we all have a responsibility to look after her, to protect her, and to keep the planet healthy for our future generations. So for me, coming back to the West and having to translate my journey from the Amazon to the West has taken, well, literally years and years and years of integration. And that is because I had no idea what it meant to be a shaman. And I'm starting to now kind of formulate what it means to me. And I think that that's where the issue lies, is that there is no one definition of a shaman. We could look at the origins of the word shaman. We know that it comes from Siberia and from the Russian steppes, and that there have been indigenous shamans living and holding space for their local communities for thousands of years. And those shamans differ in all the different areas of where they were in their local communities. So a Siberian shaman is very different to a Peruvian shaman, that's very different to a Colombian shaman, that's very different to an Ecuadorian shaman or a Brazilian shaman. And then you go further down into the tribal elements of that. So different shamans will have different responsibilities in the different tribes that they live in. So it's very difficult to have such a wide shamanism is such a wide definition. It's difficult to understand what it is to be a shaman because there's no defined boundary as what actually that means. And for example, in the Amazon, they're really curanderos, which is people that come and cure, but they would also be called shamans. So they take on that role and they call themselves shamans and they see themselves as shamans, but actually they're curanderos as well. So it gets complicated with the definition of what a shaman is. So for me, a shaman is someone who has dedicated their life to bringing humanity and the planet back into balance. So as a plant medicine shaman, my role is using plant medicines to help bring humanity and the planet back into balance. And that is a definition that the Chiricsanungo plant gave me in 2015. In 2015, I was back in the Amazon and I felt very confused at that part of my journey. It had been 14 years. My mother had come and drunk ayahuasca with me, and I'd been told by the ayahuasca that my apprenticeship was complete and I could now go out and my training was ended. But I was still confused as to what that actually meant and what, if ever, I was a shaman. And I would fight against that quite a lot because I didn't really feel like I earned that, the name shaman, or I wasn't sure what it actually meant to be a shaman and what my role was. And I got to the Amazon and I was fortunate enough to be able to do a Chiricsanungo dieta. And Chiricsanungo is an incredibly important plant of the Amazon. In fact, I haven't met a shaman in the Amazon who offers ayahuasca who hasn't taken Chiricsanungo. It is a prerequisite to take Chiricsanungo if you're on the shamanic path. And that is because the Chiricsanungo kind of brings you back into an alignment with your heart and almost gives you permission to walk the shaman path. And that was the experience that I got with Chiricsanungo, was that I felt he had given me permission to walk the plant medicine shaman path. And as soon as I got that permission from him, the doubt and the confusion really melted away. And I felt that I was on the right path. And I feel that he gave me that, the acknowledgement to keep on walking the path that I was walking, because I didn't feel that doing workshops or retreats or learning how to play a gong or being in ceremony really depicted what a shaman was. That was what a shaman did. And and I wanted to know what it was to be a shaman, not what I needed to do in order to show myself as a shaman. So there is a big difference between the doing and the being of a shaman. So the plant medicine told me that a shaman is someone who, my interpretation for me is to bring the planet or the environment and humanity, help to bring them back into balance, and to leave the planet in a healthier place than how I came into it, and to do that through plant medicines. And I have chosen the 2 plant medicines, or the 3 plant medicines, or they have chosen me, and that's cacao, cannabis, and ayahuasca. And I would say that my teacher plants are Chiricsanungo and Taway, because in the Amazon with my teacher, I didn't take chacruna, I took Taway, which is called the illuminator, and actually illuminates who we really are. So I felt that the Taway had enabled me to reconnect to Mother Earth in a way where there was no more separation, and the Chiricsanungo gave me permission to be able to walk this path, because without permission from the plant medicines, it's an incredibly tough journey to walk, and it's a very, very difficult path to find yourself on. So it's a journey. To call yourself a shaman, I also have to mention, is a brutal act, and it takes a lot of bravery to actually call yourself a shaman. I've held this name now for 11 years, and I have been through the absolute fire of hell to still be holding that name. So if anyone is going around calling themselves a shaman, you can be sure that they are being tested to make sure they can hold that vibration immediately. The moment you align yourself to the shamanic elements of Mother Earth and nature, you're going to be tested to see whether you're in alignment with that belief system or not. And it takes an incredible amount of courage to go through the fire and still be able to hold that vibration. And I have been through the fire, of course, a number of times, and still able to hold that vibration. So have accepted it, though it has been very difficult to acknowledge that as a Westerner, I can be a shaman. And that's something that's taken a long time to come to alignment with myself around. And again, it's that idea that I'm indigenous to Mother Earth. So whether I live in the urban jungle or the Amazon jungle, I am who I am. And I've realized as we walk the path of shamanism that it's something that can't be taken away from you. Once you know who you are, it actually doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, because you can't stop being who you are. And in order to become who you are, you have to remove all the veils of illusion in order to become who you are. And it's removing those veils of illusion, those ego veils of illusion, that enable us to then stand in our power, which is why holding the vibration of shaman is so difficult, because the ego can easily get attached to the concept of shaman and to the grandiose ideal of shamanism. And especially in the West, where we don't really have a spirituality, so we've adopted a lot of our spirituality from Hinduism. And from the East, one of those things that we've adopted is the concept of guru. And so it's very easy to place the idea of shamanism into the same category of as guru, and idolize and put on a pedestal shamans. But actually, the reality of it is that the shaman isn't a guru. The shaman just works on behalf of Mother Earth and humanity. That's their job. That's their purpose. Is it to be in service in order to bring humanity and the planet back into balance. And in order to do that, you have to let go of all the ego ideas of being a shaman to enable that the life force energy of Mother Earth to flow through you. And that takes a long time to reach, with a lot of trials and tribulations as the ego removes its grip over the heart and slowly gets quieter and quieter for the heart to then be the main source of connection. And the heart is the part of ourselves that's connected to the whole of the collective consciousness. So when we follow our hearts, we're following the collective consciousness of Mother Earth and humanity. When we follow our egos, it's very much our own selfish needs and wants. And in order to reduce the tight grip that the ego has, you have to go through the fire in order to kind of burn some of that intensity away. And that's where the pain comes in. And over my time of walking this shaman path, I've learned that we are always making a choice, and we are always in a compromise. And we are in a compromise between our hearts and our egos. And what the shaman has learnt is that when they walk the path of the heart, they get the short-term pain of the ego and the long-term pleasure of the heart. When we walk the path of the ego, we get the short-term pleasure of the ego, but the long-term pain of the heart. And so what the shaman has been able to do is to acknowledge and almost enjoy and embrace the short-term pain of the ego, knowing that they're going to receive the long-term pleasure of the heart. And what most of us are doing are choosing the short-term pleasure of the ego and compromising that long-term pain for the long-term pain of the heart, because the short-term pleasure of the ego is a lot easier. We think it's a lot easier and a lot more pleasurable, but actually it's a lot more painful, because while we're getting the short-term pleasure of the ego, the heart is in a lot of long-term pain. And for me, the shaman knows the difference between the two, and all actions are in alignment with the heart, which means it's in alignment with all the collective unconscious, and therefore is working on behalf of humanity and Mother Earth in order to bring this planet and humanity back into balance, which is so sorely needed. And what I also heard, what also the medicines told me, is that what we're seeing is this respect for indigenous knowledge and wisdom. And actually, if more of us stood up in the West and honoured the indigenous fight by fighting in our own territory, the abuses of natural resources that are going on here, then together we'd be a much stronger voice, rather than just focusing on what they're doing. There's a lot of environmental issues happening here, and what we need to be doing is each community is sorting out their localized issues, so that everyone works within their local community. So for me, I'm based in London because that's where I feel I can be of most use. I've chosen hemp because I feel that this is a plant that we desperately need to be growing in England, and to be removing all the barriers of growth that are stopping us. And so for me, being an urban shaman is looking at what is needed here in the UK. And I think the reason why that has been my path is because I never was able to go back to the Amazon. It took 9 years to return back to the Amazon after I left. And by then, the connection had kind of been broken, and I'd kind of made my roots in England. And because that's been such a stark contrast for me personally, I feel very strongly that being an urban Western shaman is an important part of the journey that I've had to take, rather than escaping back to the Amazon and living in the Amazon. A lot of people ask me, "Oh, why don't you go and live in the Amazon?" And the reality of it is that I don't come from the Amazon. I come from the urban jungle. I was born in London. This is my city, and this is where the help's needed here as well. So I feel it's important to honor my own roots and my own ancestry and my own place where I was born, and to be the change here in my own country, rather than going to another country and doing it there. I think it's an individual choice for everybody, but not we can't all be traveling to other countries to fight other battles. So there's a lot of battles that need to be fought here in the UK, and becoming aware of that stops us feeling so helpless. In fact, we can feel a lot more positive when we realize that actually we can be the change right here in our own home, in our own land. And there's a lot of opportunity right now to be the change. We're seeing Extinction Rebellion highlighting a lot of the environmental issues and things that are happening, and we're seeing a lot of more people waking up to that and making a stand and being the change. And for me, those are the people who are dedicating their lives to bringing the planet back into balance and bringing humanity back into balance. For me, whether they'd like to call themselves shamans or not, for me, these are the modern day shamans, are the ones that have dedicated their life to bringing humanity and the planet back into balance in whichever way they're being called, because we all have our unique gifts and tools and things that we need to. We all have our own skills that we need to bring to Mother Earth, and it's about finding out what your purpose is, what your skill is, what your service is. 100% in service to humanity and Mother Earth. That's for me. Um, that for me is a thing that you on Facebook, and then when I was, and if you are not in alignment, then life will very quickly show you when you're not in alignment. And then name Rebecca Shaman. I was given a half years in a pharmaceutical and half and into Peter, and I decided to print it under that name because I felt it was her journey in the Amazon, and that my previous incarnation had kind of died, and that the Rebecca of the book needed to own that story. But I hadn't really thought about it very clearly. because when the book was finally published in 2004, it had 7 years down the line since coming back from the Amazon. And I was, sorry, 6 years. And I was no longer Rebekita anymore. I'd obviously moved on. I had done many, many things in that 6 years. And so the vibration of Rebekita no longer resonated with me. And when the book came out, people started calling me Rebekita. And it became more and more uncomfortable because I wasn't Rebekita, but I was no longer my previous incarnation of Rebecca Bloom. So I found myself in this terrible identity crisis, and I didn't know what to call myself. And every time I called myself Rebekita, I just cringed inside. And so for 2.5 years, I was very lost as to what to, excuse me. Excuse me. I was very lost as to what to call myself. And I was really in a dilemma. And then in 2006, so about just over two and a bit years later, I watched a program about Iboga, which Bruce Parry did on Tribe, and I had a very strong message that it was the Iboga had my name, and I had to go to an Iboga ceremony, and the Iboga would give me my name. And through some amazing synchronicities, I found myself in an Iboga ceremony of spring equinox 2007, which was exactly 2.5 years after my book was published, which was published in September 2004. So exactly 2.5 years later, I found myself in this Iboga ceremony with the Gabonese shaman who had flown over from Africa. And it was there that the Iboga gave me my name in the ceremony as Rebecca Shaman. At the time, it was a traumatic moment because I was desperate to find out who I was and what my name was, because I felt once I knew my name, I would be more free to understand myself. We don't really realize just how important our names are. We don't give our names enough credit when we resonate with our name, when we resonate with the vibration of our name. I think we're much more in alignment with our purpose. Certainly that I found that from my own personal experience. So when I was I could keep the name Rebecca, I was in so much joy because it meant that I could stay in that vibration of Rebecca. But the shaman, I just didn't feel like I'd be. I was ashamed as uh, tried to negotiate with and he begged me, and he said that was my name and I had to. And I was in such a dilemma because I didn't have a name quite like that. So I was either back to where I started. And so I had to do that. And so that name I would never have given myself. Name I really asking from anyone is one that you have to be fully committed to on all levels, on a DNA level, almost on a cellular DNA level, because the vibration of the shaman is so hard and brutal that unless you're really fully attuned to that path, it's a very, very difficult path to stay on and to continue. So my feeling is also that by give the Iboga giving me my name, I had to accept the journey that I had been on, because the Iboga said that I'd been, trained in a lineage, and so therefore I had the training. But then it sped up my alignment with my purpose and myself. But it's a lifelong journey. This isn't, you don't just get the name and that's it. This is a lifelong process, a lifelong journey. it's something that you choose to walk, the path that you choose to walk for the rest of your life. And there's no, once you're on this path, there's no getting off it, which is also the burden and the blessing. But then when we walk the shaman path, the burdens and the blessings are incredibly noticeable in each step of the way. So there's enormous blessings and enormous burdens. I believe right now that it's incredibly important. I believe it's incredibly important at the moment for more Westerners to acknowledge themselves as shaman, especially the ones that have been walking the path and been walking the journey, and for more Westerners to stand up and honor in honor of Mother Earth and the plant medicines. I feel it's really, really essential. It's becoming more and more important for Westerners to stand up and walk walk the path of Mother Earth and humanity, and to start acknowledging and owning their part on this path. And if more Westerners stood up or acknowledged their role, not about what they do, but about who they are inside of themselves. It's not something that, like I said, that you Instagram, but something that you feel inside yourself. We would see, I think, a much quicker shift in consciousness here in the West. It's already happening, but if a few more of us could stand up and unite, then I think also it would bring more focus onto how important shamanism is right now on the planet, because indigenous people, shaman wisdom and knowledge is incredibly important. And another really important part of the shamanic path is recognizing that anything that we do now, we're doing it for the 7th generation down. So any decision or any action that you're taking now needs to have positive reverberations for the 7th generation down. So a shaman is working in accordance to that law and is leaving a planet cleaner for the 7th generation down. And for me, that's a really important part of this as well. It's not about feeding our own need. It's about keeping a planet healthy and vibrant for the generations that are coming after us. And for me, for an urban shaman, that's the one of the main key messages. I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask me, or anything that I've said that they'd like to ask me around this discussion, or anything that they've been feeling about shamanism that you're unsure of. Anyone like to say anything about it? Okay, so no one is asking any questions. So one thing that I've also found is that the indigenous idea of shamanism in regards to protecting our natural resources is such an important element of this journey. And I see we see a lot of indigenous people now taking charge of the Amazon and water supplies in America. And it would be, and also XR today, for example, going to BP and arguing and standing outside and protesting against the BP offices, and also the Royal Opera House that are sponsored by BP. And this is, for me, the start of the shamanic movement. This is, for me, the urban shamans making a stand against atrocities to our environment, to our planet. And the more of us that can do our little bit in the world, the more of us that can walk and make a difference and make a change, the more we'll see a shift in consciousness happening. And what I'm seeing in the West, certainly over the last 21 years that I've been walking this path specifically, is that there definitely is a waking up occurring, certainly in England, in the understanding of the importance of shamanism in the modern world and the need for more ritual and ceremony. So for me, growing hemp is an important part of bringing the planet back into balance, and offering cacao to bring mental health back into balance. One thing that we're really missing in the West is time for integration, processing, and reflection. In the Amazon, people would sit, we would have a break, we would work from about 6 o'clock in the morning to about 11 before the sun came, to the high heat, and then we would stop until about 3, and then we would work probably from about 3 to 5, and sometimes we would go hunting later on in the evening. And there was a lot of time for rest and integration and reflection. And what we're finding in the West is that we don't ever get a break to stop, reflect, integrate, and connect. And this is having a massive detrimental effect on our health and well-being, certainly on our mental health and well-being. And the importance of ceremony and cacao ceremonies in particular, which is what I do, is to enable people to dive deep and have time to process and reflect and integrate things that are happening in their life. Because when we give ourselves that time to reflect and integrate and connect with ourselves, we get to hear the answers, find the solutions, and receive the clarity that we need in order to move forward more freely. And by bringing back some of these shamanic practices, like being in ceremony, it enables people in the West to have that time in sacred space. And sacred space is a really essential part of humanity's need to come together and connect and integrate. And we don't have that. We haven't created the idea of sacred space in our busy Western lifestyles. And now we are on a 24-hour call with all sorts of social media and our phones. That is becoming almost an overwhelming bombardment of information and decisions and choices and consumerism. And we're not balancing this extreme intensity of so much information and things being thrown at us, with creating that sacred space to stop and be in stillness and quiet, and to be able to dive deep and listen to our own inner wisdom and get clear what we need to do. So for me also, shamanism is about bringing back some of these ancient practices that are being practiced in other cultures but have been lost here. And one of them is the sacred space. The other one is drinking plant medicines. And we've been in a position now in the West where all plant medicines are prohibited, banned, and made illegal, except for cacao. So anything that shifts consciousness or enables us to think outside of the box or go outside of ourselves has been made illegal. So cacao is the only plant medicine left that we can take legally in sacred space. And for me, that's a very important thing that we have, a vessel for us, because by utilizing cacao's medicine and being in a plant medicine ceremony and sitting in ceremony with others in sacred space and diving deep like we have always done, our souls and our spirits and our hearts are resonating with this ancient practice that humans have always done. And when we come into space like this and able to drink plant medicines and connect with humans on that deep level and connect with ourselves on that deep level, it awakens and stirs something quite primordial and primordial within us, and primeval even within us. And I think that that's really important, because as we go more and more into technology and AI, it's really important we don't lose our fundamental sense of what being human is, which is coming together, ingesting plants, sitting in a sacred circle, sharing, connecting, integrating, and diving deep within ourselves. And so these sacred ceremonies are incredibly important to keep that link between the ancient and the modern alive. And for me, creating those spaces in London is a way of keeping this connection to Mother Earth alive. Likewise with the moon. So today we have the new moon in Cancer. It's a total solar eclipse. All the ancient religions were ruled by the moon. Their calendars were moon calendars. It's only Christianity that chose to follow the sun calendar. Without our connection to the moon, we have lost connection to the natural rhythms of the earth. The moon has many faces, but 4 main faces, which is new moon, half moon, new moon, half moon, and full moon. And then in between you have it as it wanes and waxes. So 3 faces. And this is the moon cycles are very important. It's a 28-day cycle, and within that 28-day cycle, the moon affects the tides, the growth of plants and nature, also our hair and our own natural rhythm, because it connects with the tides. And obviously we're 70%, 90% water, so we are also affected by the moon. And when we reconnect to the moon, when we reconnect to the natural rhythms of nature, the natural flows of nature, we come out of what I call the bamboozlement of time. And that is because the Gregorian calendar doesn't have that flow. It doesn't have that natural connection to nature like the moon does. And so we are disconnected completely from these natural rhythms. And when we move back and turn our attention back to the moon and back to these natural rhythms, we start living more in tune with nature. And once we start living more in tune with nature, we kind of lose a lot of the disconnect that we have naturally from our calendar. And when we reconnect to nature, we find that life becomes a lot more easy and effortless, because we are in a natural flow. And life wants us to thrive. The whole point of life is that it wants us to thrive. If you go into the jungle, you see that thriving everywhere. And here in the West, we've domesticated our nature and controlled our nature. So we've lost the memory of the vibrant, wildness of the jungle. And when you go back to the jungle, you see that wildness and you see that thriving. We remember that actually life is here to help us to thrive. And when we understand that, we no longer feel a victim of life. We become a co-creator with life. And that's and the more of us that can move into this understanding, and the more of us that can live in tune with nature, with the moon cycles, with the rhythm and flows, and the more we become in alignment with that, and in service to humanity and the planet, automatically the more happy and more peaceful and more contented we become. And we start losing that ego, starts losing its grip on needing to control, fearful of losing things, and all the conditions and beliefs that actually disconnect us completely from the natural flows of nature. So this Cancer new moon today is really bringing up things around safety and security, and also the need to be loved and feeling loved. So with the solar eclipse, it's illuminating specifically where we're not feeling loved in our lives, or where we might be feeling rejected or abandoned. So those feelings might be coming up a bit stronger today. And also, how safe are we feeling in our lives, and how secure we're feeling in our lives. So the moon also enables us to look at various aspects of our lives and see where we're not really in alignment, in order to put things back into alignment. So it's so for me, shamanism is a being rather than a doing. It's about disconnecting from the uh, the Gregorian calendar and moving into a moon-based way of life that is much more in tune with nature. Once we start to, for me, that's the first step of going on the shaman path, is becoming more attuned to nature, more connected to nature, utilizing the moon and the moon wave from new to full and back again, in order to start becoming more in tune with what's happening around you in nature. Once that gets stronger, you start automatically feeling a lot calmer. Then it's looking at what's your specific skill and purpose. What are you offering to humanity and the planet? What's your purpose here on the planet? And how are you leaving the planet for the next 7 generations down? That's another really essential question to ask yourself. Once you have come to the understanding of who you are and what your particular purpose is then taking practical action to make that happen. And in order to hear that, it's coming into sacred space, it's diving deep, it's working with the plant medicines to hear those messages, especially cacao, in order to release some of the blockages that are stopping us from being in tune. And then it's the recognition that Mother Earth is our home, that humanity is our brothers and sisters, and there is no separation, whether you're living in the urban jungles of London or any capital city, or you're living in the Amazon jungles in South America. We are all belong to Mother Earth, and she is our home for each one of us, and each one of us has a part to play in this unfolding planetary story. And the more we can align ourselves to this understanding, the more of us that can align ourselves to this understanding, the quicker we will be to be able to leave a planet healthy for the next 7 generations down. And I'd like to finish this webinar with a story of the caterpillar, because what's happening on Mother Earth can be likened to what happens to the caterpillar, because nature holds the answers to all our problems. And it's called biomimicry. It's a fascinating topic. And the caterpillar starts consuming 3 times its body weight. And as it consumes 3 times its body weight, it starts going into crisis. And as it goes into crisis, imaginal cells start appearing in the body of the caterpillar. And these imaginal cells start imagining the vision of the butterfly. And the cocoon, the caterpillar starts creating a cocoon, and within that cocoon, the imaginal cells start taking over the body of the caterpillar. And the last thing to go is the caterpillar's head before it transforms into the butterfly. And this is what's happening on Mother Earth as we consume 3 times our planet's natural resources. We are going into crisis, and on the body of Mother Earth, the imaginal cells are appearing. and you and me are the imaginal cells, and these us imaginal cells are imagining a greater version of Mother Earth for future generations. And in my understanding is that rather than we take over the body of the caterpillar, the imaginal cells switch on other imaginal cells. So by being an imaginal cell is to inspire others to become the imaginal cell in order for everyone to have the same focus and vision for a healthy planet for future generations. And at the beginning, there's only a few imaginal cells that start appearing, but after a while, more and more cells appear as imaginal cells until you reach the tipping point. And this is what's happening right now, and we are the imaginal cells. And it's up to us to live that imaginal cell, and then in that inspire others to become imaginal cells before we're all imaginal cells on the planet, and we can change the trajectory we're on to leaving a planet healthy for the next 7 generations down. So Shamanism 101 for me is about becoming the imaginal cell, about bringing the planet and humanity back into balance in whatever way you can, however you can. It's a journey of the heart, and it's a lifetime journey. But when we choose to be the imaginal cell, when we light ourselves up by being the imaginal cell, and we become the cure rather than the disease, then life automatically changes and becomes one full of joy and magic and beauty, and it becomes wonderful and wondrous journey. So I hope that you found this webinar interesting. If you have any questions, please do email me. And if any takeaway is this: be the imaginal cell, help bring this planet back into balance, so that we can leave a healthy planet for our future generations. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to the next meeting up with you in the next webinar next month. And thank you again for coming on.